Hope you're awake after that obnoxious ass music. Hello, it's me, Professor Yano. Hey, what's up? How are you doing? Hope you enjoyed the last lecture. This is part 1 of Tests of Evidence. This is lecture 6. Get your kicks in lecture 6. Yeah. I'll come up with a thank you. No, please be seated. Thank you. I'll try to come up with a clever title like that for every single one of them. Yeah. So what's going on? I hope everything is well and that your speech assignments are coming along well. I do want to remind you of something. Something you're probably tired of me reminding you about, which is we have a Discord. Look at this. All these channels, all this. What's the problem here? Well, some of you are online, but look at the problem. I have all these public speaking classes. Look at this. Nobody's from our class is posting in here. I'm not very happy. Now, obviously, these are tools you can use or not use, and maybe you don't need them. Maybe these videos are enough, or maybe you feel like you're enough, and that's fine, and you're doing a good job with everything. But seriously, though, you got to have some questions. Maybe you think your questions are stupid. Let me give an example of a good question to ask in Discord. Am I doing it right? Is this a good topic? How do I move from this point to another one? Is this source adequate? I mean, that's the topic of this video. So you see, I strategically put that one last, so it'll be super relevant for this video. See? Something going on up here. There's something going on up here. I didn't just get this job because of my looks. I mean, whoa, big news. That's a big thing for you to accept. But it's true. I did not get this job based on my looks, even though that might be your assumption. I actually do know some stuff. All right, let's get into today's talk, which is going to be about the tests of evidence, part 2. Part 2. Made a PowerPoint for this one because the tests of evidence reading, it's a PDF. You can check it out. It's available. But the tests of evidence reading is, let's see if I can get rid of myself. Yeah, there we go. The test of evidence reading is about evidence. And evidence is a broad term. I didn't talk about this in the last video, but let's talk about the difference between evidence and proof real quick. Evidence usually refers to something more empirical. That is something you could touch, taste, smell, feel. Something material. We don't say real in humanities and rhetoric studies because real implies some kind of ideological judgment or value judgment on it. But the material can be the judgment for a claim about the real. For example, the material presence of a weapon could be the judgment of the real of this person is a violent person. Now, that's not necessary, and that would require a lot more evidence, a lot more argumentation to make that claim stick to where we'd want to assent to it, ethically agree to it, but it's still kind of there. So we can't just go around making claims without substantiating them in some serious kind of way. I don't know why that keeps coming up. That's from the last lecture. Is this the one I want? Yeah, this is the one I want. Oh, yeah. So anyway, I'm a big Lord of the Rings stan, big fan. So sometimes I get these Lord of the Rings memes. Okay, so have you read the Newman and Newman text? Maybe you've read the Newman and Newman. It's the other PDF in there. But one of the things you might have noticed is that it's old. Robert P. Newman, Dale Newman, this book was written in the 1960s, and it shows. Well, that's a good deal, $4 for the Newman and Newman book. Yeah, Indy, you could put that in a museum, baby. Where's my $4? Probably shipping, it's probably more like $6, but for a museum piece, that's a bargain. Bro, let's stock up the museum with some good old pieces. Yo, it'd be great. Now, anyway, here's the thing about the Newman and Newman book. I am a scholar of argumentation, believe it or not. I'm a scholar of debate and of rhetoric. Everywhere I go, all the old heads, all the serious scholars in the world, the older people, the people who've been around the block, who have the big publications, the big names, They all say the same thing, which is this. If you want to learn about evidence, you want to be a master of evidence and support in rhetoric and argumentation, you need to read this book. They all say the same thing. So, of course, it's super old, and the examples are super old, and I don't expect to get any of those examples. They're super old. I don't even understand probably 60%, 65% of the examples. I had to look up. But that's the difference between me and you. I looked them up. Did you look them up? I don't think you did. If you did, post in Discord about it. Prove me wrong. Give me a post in Discord. Show me that you looked up some of these examples. I dare you. I dare you. Dare you to do it. So anyway, allergies are still in full swing over here. Excuse me while I sneeze. Now, I could have edited that out, but I wanted you to know that I really am suffering for you people. Recording this video and suffering with big sneeze. Could edit that out. Might still edit that out, but probably not. Anyway, this is an old book, but it's still pretty relevant. Let's go through each one of the claims. And also, if you want a handy-dandy guide to everything I'm going to talk about, the last couple of pages here are the 14 tests of evidence they cover that we're going to talk about. Now, there are no hard and fast rules of evidence in everyday life is a brilliant, brilliant thing to say. I also said that in the last lecture I gave. And I think that that's an important... Remember, we're not interested in being right because others are wrong. It's not a binary. Rhetoric is not a binary. I'm right, you're wrong. You're wrong, I'm right. It doesn't work like that. What it is that when we're trying to decide what is best, when we're trying to influence other people with our words, the number one thing we have to do is make an ethical connection with them. That means we need to be fair and open and direct, whatever that might mean. There's huge debates about what those terms might mean that I'm not going to get into in this video, but maybe I'll get into in a future video. What does it mean to be fair in argumentation? What does it mean to be direct? These are things that could be book topics, if I'm being completely honest. You could probably write a book about, and people have written books about communication, argumentative ethics. So it's not a small topic. It's not something small. But that's really what we're trying to do here. And it's not silver bullet. It's not trying to prove other people wrong. It's trying to say, did we make the best case? Are there reasons why we might want to put the brakes on feeling or thinking or doing something? We don't want to act rashly, and we certainly don't want to act because someone has hit us with something we feel is true and immediate. Rush into action. That's how we get into big trouble. We've gotten into big trouble in this country and probably in your life personally by rushing into action based on rumor. Have you ever heard of the Iraq War? Yeah, enough said about that. So well-meaning people trying to make a case, trying to do something good, did not apply tests of evidence, or maybe conveniently ignored them if they aren't good people. They decided to leave them out and to deceive. Now, that's obviously unethical. But there's the more interesting ethical question is, should you be advocating for things if you're not prepared? Should you be advocating for things if you're not prepared to evaluate the evidence in the most objective way possible? So no hard and fast rules of evidence in everyday life. Legal argumentation and legal rules of evidence are designed for one thing, and that is courtrooms. There's no reason why we should globalize what they do in a courtroom or what legal argumentation is. There's no reason to globalize that to the everyday because we are most of the time not facing legal questions. Every court case comes down to the same simple question. What is the legal remedy? That's really it. Is this person guilty of this thing? Well, what is this thing? It's defined clearly. We don't have to debate about that. We can debate about whether it meets the definition. If they did they do it in extenuating circumstances? What should the sentence be? What's the legal remedy? Someone's suing somebody. How much are the damages? Well, let's look to other cases to see how they determine it. It's very simple. So legal argumentation doesn't help us unless we're dealing with legal questions. If we're dealing with questions about how should we interpret the past, what should we do in the future policy-wise, legal reasoning is not going to help us, which might be the reason why our country's in a lot of trouble, if I can editorialize for a minute, because the only people making our laws in Congress and anything, they all have law degrees. That's not diverse. That's called homogenous. Gets us into serious trouble. So we don't want to make the easy one-to-one correspondence between legal argumentation and everyday argumentation. Everyday argumentation is far more rich, far more complicated, far more emotional, far more indeterminate than a legal case could ever be. And that's good, because we don't want legal cases to be wild and indeterminate where people are getting the death penalty for stealing a chicken or whatever, which is the way it is before you have all these legal or jurisprudence innovations that come through thousands of years of legal history, which you go read about. And you probably will read about if you become a legal historian or some kind of attorney or scholar of the law or something like that, which would be cool. I wish you the best. But don't think that lawyers know how to argue in all situations. They do not. They're only good at one thing, and that is talking on the phone to make a deal. They hardly ever will go to a courtroom and make arguments like you see on TV. All right, so these might correspond, Newman and Newman say, with legal stuff, but don't make the mistake of thinking it is legal stuff, right? Don't make the mistake. Okay. Let's go slideshow. All right, first one. What is the test of evidence? These are ways to determine if the evidence actually supports what it's meant to support. Should we assent, that is a fancy word for agree or buy into what the speaker wants us to believe, think, know, feel? Are we going to buy into that? Or should we put the brakes on and wait for something more? Let's look. First of all, degree of tension. I'm going to have to remove myself from this, aren't I? Degree of tension. The lower the tension associated with an event, the higher the credibility of reports about it. What does this mean? If you are in a very tense and emergency kind of situation, like in the news or an event's happening, it's very tense and everyone's emotions are running high, the reports about it in the media might not be that credible. The lower the tension, the lower the immediacy, the better the reports might be. So when we think about this, I want you to think about the difference between news analysis, which is something you might find in deep journalism, like the London Review of Books, or places that do deeper political journalism, versus CNN. Because CNN always wants to ramp up the tension of events. Or if it's a war zone and people are reporting on the war zone, that information might not be credible. If that attack is happening now, it might be a little bit more credible. When the tension goes down, it can be evaluated a little bit better. So that just kind of makes sense, right? Degree of tension. The higher the tension, the more we should look carefully. It doesn't mean they're wrong. The more carefully we should look at that information. Accessibility. The more accessible the situation being reported on, the more credible the report. So this raises a question about, how all these books came out after Donald Trump was president about how crazy he was in the Oval Office. We might say, well, these aren't accessible. These are very private matters. Who knows who's allowed in the overall Oval Office? What can they say to each other? These might not be as credible as things that maybe have more accessibility, like public statements, where a camera was available and recorded it, or where a lot of people saw it. We always have to look at this with the lens of credibility. Why would people lie about what's going on in the Oval Office? Why might they do that? Okay, they have no motive to do that. Well, then it makes it a little bit more credible. But the more accessible a situation, the better it is to report on it. If you're reporting on what's going on in a boardroom or what's going on in like a sealed off country like Bhutan, you might not have very good information because it might not be that accessible. Are journalists allowed in there? That kind of thing. Who's allowed in? Where are these reports coming from? The more suspicious, the more carefully we should look at that evidence. Freedom to report. If the witness, now when they say witness, we got to be careful about this because, they're coming from a legal paradigm. And what I mean when I say legal paradigm is that they're coming from the idea that law is a nice analogy or metaphor to talk about evidence. And they're right. It is a great metaphor analogy for that. But that's why they put so many caveats. Caveat is a fancy word for warning. Beware. Ever heard buyer beware? Caveat emptor. Beware. Caveat's a little warning, like be careful, caution. They use these terms, but a witness would be anybody who has direct access to something. So sometimes I talk about, in my classes, a witness being a scientist who's done research. They might be testimony from a witness, is the way we might think about that. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're like someone who saw a crime happen, but they have direct access to the thing. All right, so the more freedom a witness has to report things as he sees them, the greater his credibility. So if a witness is maybe being leaned on or they don't have that freedom to report things honestly, the lesser the credibility. And that could be a number of things, like, do they work for a politically biased organization? Are they speaking for a politically biased organization? Did they take a lot of money from an organization that wants things to be a particular way in a particular order? How free are they to report their findings? Or are they restricted by the laws in their country? Maybe they live in an oppressive regime and the country won't let them speak freely. On pain of death, or maybe by torturing a family member to the point of death. There are countries that do this, So sometimes people don't have the freedom to report the way we might assume they would, living in a country like the United States where we have freedom of the press and free speech. All right, let's look at the next one. Authenticity. The greater the presumption of authenticity, the higher the credibility of a document. So this means, is this an authentic document? Does it come from who they say it comes from? Did the person who wrote it really write it? Is this document really from the White House? Is this really a document from the Pentagon? How authentic is it? So some people might say, oh, this comes from the Pentagon. This means that, like, when you think about the thing in the media right now, one of the things going on right now is aliens. Do we have aliens working in the government? Do we have alien species walking on the planet? Do we have preserved alien bodies in Mexico? Do we have flying saucers in the Nevada desert that we're experimenting on? What are we talking about? What exactly do we have? This is a great example for this, because they might say this is a government document. Well, we need to really make sure that's an authentic government document. How would we know that? Well, there are ways to trace the provenance of a document. Whose hands has it been in? Where did it come from? Who was the source? Did the source have access to that document, etc.? That's the way we would check it. So if something is very authentic, then we say it's very good evidence. But if there are questions about it, it might be time to put the brakes on until we get some better evidence. Internal consistency. The higher the internal consistency of an author, the more credible his testimony. So an author would be anybody who's writing something, right? Somebody who is writing a book or an article document. If they're internally consistent, that is, they're moving through the story in a way that makes sense, has narrative fidelity, has narrative validity, it's making sense, then the more credible it is. If they're writing a book and they're all over the place, excuse me, and they make all kinds of contradictory statements, or they say something shouldn't be believed and it's from a source similar to their own, that consistency might be cause for a red flag to say maybe we shouldn't completely buy into what this person is saying. There might be some difficulties. Not that they're wrong, not that they're crazy, not that they're evil, not that they're unethical. Merely that we need to slow down and look for other sources, or maybe not give that source a huge amount of weight in our decision about whether or not to do what the speaker wants us to do. And you need to think about this too when you're making a speech. If you find evidence you think is great for your speech, look at this. If you find internal inconsistencies, you might say, I can't use this because now they'll be questioning everything that I'm saying, and this might hurt my case. So don't take the easy way out. It's easy when you're working on assignment and you're in college and you have like 50 million different assignments to do. Believe me, I know it's stressful. You might be looking for the easy way out and just go for whatever Google source you find that seems relevant to you and that you think, oh yeah, look at that lighting, that you think is enough. You got to do the test of evidence on it because it will hurt the credibility of your speech as a whole. So you don't want to give them reasons to not listen to you. Right? It's very important. Very, very, very important. You want to make sure to keep the faith. Oh, yeah. Is there a Billy Joel song like that? I don't have it queued up and can't play it. Carefulness of generalization. Now, generalizations are the cause of much grief, great grief in the arts of rhetoric. We all know about the fallacy, the hasty generalization, which is a conclusion made from too little evidence too broadly. And it's a fallacy because it seems persuasive, because we have like 2 or 3 instances, and then we draw a huge conclusion, but it's too big of a conclusion for the amount of examples or evidence that we have. So the more careful the generalizations, the higher credibility of the testimony. That is what they are trying to get us to believe, what they're saying. So generalizations have to be carefully done. So it's actually counterintuitive. The better generalization will have lots of words in it that would diminish the power. They'd say, well, we could generalize sometimes under conditions similar to this, that people who are like the people in the study could contract this maybe if that's actually a better conclusion to draw from a scientific study than beer cures cancer, which is the way the media will do it. That's a huge generalization. And that would mean that they're not very credible if they make huge generalizations based on research studies, and then they don't go into particularities of the research study. It's much better to be a little more cautious. But this is why faculty members, like myself, we appear on the media, but then we're never asked back because we're too cautious. The media doesn't want that. The media wants grand and glorious generalizations, which is a reason to not trust cable news or television news in general. Grand and glorious generalizations. So I'll go in the media to talk about political debates. And they're like, Professor, who won the debate? I'm like, I don't know. We can't really say that. We don't have a metric. We don't have an agreed upon metric. We don't have agreed upon rules. There's really no way to determine who won. And they'll say, well, who do you think did the best job? Trying to smuggle the question in another way as if I'm going to be caught by that. I say, well, maybe it depends under these conditions. That's the way thoughtful people who are interested in providing good evidence speak. People who aren't thoughtful about good evidence and ethical communication make huge generalizations like Joe Biden is destroying our country. And they don't provide any reasons for that. Or politician X is destroying our country. They don't provide any reasons or evidence for that. You have to make the case, and the case has to match in some way the degree of the claim that is being made. So be careful with generalizations. Okay. And careful generalizations are good generalizations. That's really the takeaway from that one. Reluctance. The greater the damage of his own testimony to himself, the more credible it is. Sorry for the sexist language. This book was written in the 60s, and it's he, him, himself everywhere, but you could put they in there and substitute easily. They just weren't sensitive to that in the 1960s, or probably many people today aren't even really sensitive to that, but they should be. Reluctance. So this is the point I made in the last video as well, which is if someone's giving testimony that damages them and is not in their best interest, it makes it more credible. But then we also have to ask the question of, like, is it too extreme? So if I come forward and say higher education is a sham, it's too expensive, nobody learns anything, and we shouldn't require public speaking classes, people might say, wow, this seems like a crazy generalization. But then people would say, well, look, he's a public speaking professor. He's actually harming his own economic ability here. Why would he say that? He must really believe in the truth or really believe in the evidence because he's saying things that harm himself. And people who give testimony that harm themselves and say, this is actually very damaging for this to come out, but I want it to come out, it's really a sign of credibility, but sometimes it can backfire. Sometimes it can be seen as you're trying to manipulate. So it's one of those things where if that happens, you say, well, is this information objective? Maybe. Is this information harmful to them? Oh, it is harmful to them, but they're still speaking against their own direct best interest. Wow. That's really saying something. So I think that's something that can really be a reason to maybe believe something. It's all in context, of course, but it might be a reason to pump the brakes if someone is giving a bias. This is the other example of maybe we should push on the gas a little bit if we see evidence like that. Expertise. The greater relevant expertise of an author, the higher credibility. So expertise in African history. They've written 17 books. They have a Ph.D. They've lived and worked in Africa. They've lived and worked in this particular African country that they've written these books about. Okay, then they can speak on the coup in Niger. That would be the way that works. So relevant experience is like, they have a PhD in communication, check. They've written 50 articles on argumentation, check. They write specifically about these forms of argument, check. They do all these kind of things. Okay, the more, the better. So if somebody just has, if they're just identifying the media as somebody with a PhD in something like English, and then they're talking about this very particular poet who's Latinx or Caribbean, and it's not really ascertained whether this person has that relevant expertise, maybe we put the brakes on a little bit. They have expertise in general, but not so specifically. You want to find the best expert around. The best expert is somebody who has demonstrated the most relevant expertise. And this is a great way to deal with objections to what it is that you're trying to get across the audience. Say, we both have experts on our sides. My expert's more relevant in the particularities here. Objectivity. We've talked about this in previous videos, have we not? Maybe on Discord or maybe in my in-person class we talked about it. Objectivity is not neutrality. Objectivity is, am I including as many relevant positions in looking at this information as possible? I'm not biasing a particular side. Objectivity doesn't mean true or neutral. And that's the way a lot of people interpret objectivity. It's true or neutral. No, objectivity is an attempt to get closer to something that isn't influenced by my particular perception and preconception of what the world should look like. It's including a lot of different diverse opinions that help us get a better picture of this, so it's not just seen from our privilege. And privilege is a good word for this, for objectivity, because our privilege is invisible. A lot of times we don't even recognize what kinds of ways we see the world that are actually hard for other people to see or don't have access to, because we don't have to worry about day-to-day threats that other people do, that people who don't have privilege do. So objectivity is a very good way to say, is my point of view coming from a place of privilege or exclusivity, or is it as inclusive as it could be? Objectivity makes things more inclusive, would be one way to think about it. So the more objectivity, the more credible. And how do you prove objectivity? Well, they're bringing in all kinds of diverse viewpoints. They're bringing in all the different sides that are imaginable, not just two. That's a trick of the American news media there, is that there are two sides to every question. No, there's as many sides as there are relevant. A good author will bring in a number of different perspectives to try to get an objective picture of what's going on, or a good source will. Accuracy record. That's a weird title. The more accurate the description and prediction record of a source, the higher the credibility of his testimony in general. So what this means is if somebody's very, very good at describing situations and other people agree with that description or quote that description, and if they have very, very good predictive impact, that is, they've talked about this before, like we think about our expert in Africa, or we think about our communication expert, if they have been able to predict before what would happen politically or what's going to happen culturally, then we can say more things about their record. This is also true in medicine. And this is also ignored when we think about medical science and politics. We don't look at the larger record. We look at the most current mistake. And I think that's a bad way to look at it. So CDC makes mistakes. We say, oh, the CDC is a political entity, not worth listening to. But let's look at their prediction and description record long term. Oh, okay, the CDC is actually a good source. What about the FDA? FDA makes mistakes. Maybe somebody was corrupt, took bribes. Maybe somebody got sick. On the latest news at the time of recording this video is that NyQuil and other things that are not in the locked area behind the pharmacy, the stuff you can make meth out of, all those cold tablets, currently NyQuil and other over-the-counter remedies, apparently, according to the FDA, were misjudged, evaluated. They weren't evaluated correctly, and actually they don't do very much compared to a placebo, so they might not be worth your money. The drug companies have yet to really come up with a response to this, because NyQuil and over-the-counter cold remedies are a multi-billion-dollar business, so they better come up with something quick or they're going to lose a lot of money, and their shares are going to plummet, and they'll be out of business, because that's how it works in advanced capitalist society like the United States, so, and the global drug trade. So that's a great example of that. The FDA maybe makes a mistake. Why would we believe that? Because of their long, accurate record of predictability and credibility. So we would want to consider that. So this is a good way to think about establishing the credibility and trust of a source that's under fire recently. So you think about the CDC, the FDA, it's always like whatever the headline is that they got wrong. Is that really enough to discredit that source? How far back is it permissible to go to reestablish credibility in that source? Something worth thinking about, I'd say. Eyewitness principle. This is an interesting one. The greater a witness's personal observation of a matter to which he testifies, the higher his credibility. So if you're right there in the middle of it, the higher credibility, because I was there, I saw it, I have direct contact with the figures, I talked to them personally. This is like the recent biography of Isaac's biography of Elon Musk. He was given unparalleled access to Elon Musk's everyday life and the people in his life, and sat with Elon Musk through meetings and everything for like a year. Walter Isaacson, is that the book? So that book just came out, and people are saying, wow, this book is incredibly credible, because, incredibly credible, what a weird phrase. That's another good one for the rhetoric books. Thank you. Incredibly credible. Thank you. No, please be seated. Thank you. I come up with all these every day, and it's included in your tuition, folks. Come up with this stuff every day. I am amazing. So the credibility of this book is beyond question because he spent 2 years walking around with Elon Musk and going to every meeting and watching him interact with people and seeing what he was all about and writing it all in this book. So that's what they mean by eyewitness principle. Now, there's some ways that you could say, well, this might not be the case. Like if somebody was in an auto accident, the trauma of it might not give them credibility. Or if somebody was assaulted, the trauma of it might not give them the credibility. But these are things that where we say, well, the trauma would overtake that. It's good to get those statements. That's why the police take statements immediately. They don't wait because they won't know they need to get it down immediately. And then later on, they can take another one, and then they can look at both of them and kind of see maybe where the truth lies in the story or what the legal action might be. So somebody who's proximate and has access has higher credibility is the idea of the eyewitness principle. But you can evaluate whether or not trauma would interfere with that situationally. It might be a reason to pump the brakes or a reason to go forward to say, well, this person had direct access to the president. This person was in those meetings in the boardroom. This person met in secret with the 3 people who are accused of this. And here's what they had to say about that meeting and what happened at that meeting. Great stuff. Contemporaneity. I can't even say this word, and I'm a Ph.D. Can't even say that word, and I have a Ph.D. Thank you. Yes, thanks. The more contemporaneous the report of a witness, the more credible his testimony. So contemporaneous, what does that mean? Well, the contemporary is the things all around us. So if this report kind of gels with what's going on around it, it's happening now, it's within the system of the things that we kind of know happening now, the better the testimony. If it's kind of old, out of date, not contemporaneous, not of the moment or of the particular current moment, then it's probably not as good of a source. We're getting near the end here. I know this is a long one. Thanks for sticking with me. This is a long lecture because these are all very important to understand. And if you lose anything or you're not, you can't follow along, you've got the list right here. You can just go look at the end of the PDF and here's the summary of each one. So you can use this as kind of your cheat sheet for when you're looking at information to determine if you're passing the test of evidence. Look at that cheat sheet. It's a good one. It is a good one. Selection of primary sources. The more discerning a writer's selection of primary sources, the more credible his testimony. What's a primary source? A primary source is a source that is directly connected and directly from the moment in question. A secondary source is somebody writing about those primary sources or writing about the event after the fact. So a primary source about like 9/11, for example, that anniversary just passed of 9/11, 2001, 22 years ago. A primary source would be someone's testimony of what it was like to be there around ground zero at that day. The secondary source would be someone talking about how people felt the afternoon and evening of September 11th today. So that's the difference between primary and secondary sources. So the more discerning in primary sources, the more that people try to get that variety or strive for objectivity by bringing a bunch of different perspectives in who were there, who were at, have access, and were of the moment. Much, much, much better. Accuracy of citation. Now, you guys are always like, oh, citations, it suck, man. We're excited. Who cares? I don't give a F. I don't give an A minus. I don't give a B. I don't give an F minus. Maybe I should say that. I don't give a flying F minus. Might be the better way to say it. But citations are very important because they show that you care and that you trust, you honor, and respect your sources. And that's why citations are important. So the more carefully someone points out words that are not their own, like what I've talked about and belabor the point in this class about source transparency, the more credible the things that author is saying. Wow, what do you know? They show care for sources that are not their own. They're taking good care of other people's things, other people's words. That's a very good and ethical person there. All right, so that's it. I say I'm not going to test you on this. There's not going to be a quiz. That I'm not going to give you an exam. But in your speeches, I'm going to be looking to see if you've applied this. Did you apply the test of evidence? Did you apply them well? Did you use anything that you maybe shouldn't have used? I'm going to be looking. I'm going to be looking very carefully at your speeches. So what do you think of the test of evidence? We have two videos on the test of evidence now. The Newman and Newman video, which is this one, and then the other one, which is the from the debate book, the one-page handout. Which one do you like the best? Which one do you think is your favorite? Which one do you think is the hardest to apply? Which one confused you? And which one do you think you have a great example on from what's going on in the media now? All of these are great fodder for a class discussion over on the Dizzy Discord. All right, see you there. See you in the next lecture. This is the end of Lecture 6. Newman and Newman, baby!